Eshani, aka Total Makeup Junkie 101. So today I'm going to be talking all about the new Masquerade palette by Juvia's Place. This palette has been getting a lot of hype. I know I come on here and say that, oh, this palette has been getting hype and that palette has been getting hype and is this palette worth the hype? But I genuinely feel like this is one of the most exciting review videos I've done on a palette lately because I have never tried anything from Juvia's Place before. Juvia's Place is an indie brand, it's an up and coming brand, and recently so many people, like really big YouTubers, have been hyping up their products. So I'm really excited to really dig into this palette and tell you guys, honestly, is this palette worth the hype? So let's go ahead and start off with my review. This palette retails for about $32 on the Juvia's Place website. And the reason I say that is because its official retail listing says $39.99, but I've always seen it kind of on sale for $32. And then there are some coupon codes available for this store and everything. So I believe with shipping, I paid a total price of right around $33. The only place I know where you can find this is directly on the Juvia's Place website, which is where I purchased mine from. It was my very first time ordering from the website, and the palette came very, very quickly. It was delivered very well, all bubble wrapped and everything. It did also come in a box, and the box did have some like bubble wrapping inside it to really protect the palette. The actual palette itself is really pretty. It's kind of like this neon hot pink with this kind of design on it. I really, really like this artwork. I think it's very unique. When you open up the palette, this is what the inside looks like. There is no mirror up here, but there are 16 eyeshadows. These shadows are really, really large. Each pan holds about 3.6 grams of product for a total net weight of 57.6 grams in this entire palette, which is a lot of product. The palette itself is made of a cardboard and it's fairly lightweight, but I still do feel like the cardboard is fairly sturdy. So I do like the packaging. Moving into discussing the actual colors you're getting in this palette, I think it is a very nice, very unique variety of shades. If you look at the top two rows in the palette, you definitely have something that sort of resembles the Urban Decay Electric palette. And then if you look at the bottom two, you have very warm tone neutral shades, which kind of reminds me of the Morphe 35O. I definitely don't want to sit here and tell you guys that any of these are exact dupes because I haven't done full side-by-side comparisons of that, but you kind of have a feel of those two palettes all kind of mixed into this one, in my opinion. Now, before I go into more of a detailed review of the textures and the colors and my opinions on this palette as a whole, I did want to go ahead and show you guys swatches of every single shade that's included in this palette on my skin tone. I am going to be swatching the first two rows together and then the second two rows together, just so you guys can see kind of all the colors and all the neutrals. So here are swatches of the first two rows in this palette. From left to right, we have Kai, Mali, Dahlia, Zola, Makeda, Zobo, Calabar, and Bori. So you guys can see the majority of the bright colors are in a very, very metallic, almost foiled finish. And I really, really like the way all of these swatch. The purples are so incredibly vibrant. The blues are as bright as can be. The only colors I would say needed a little bit of help would be the matte burgundy and then the last color, which is Bori, because it has a little bit of micro shimmer in it. And here are swatches of the third and fourth row in this palette. From left to right, we have Giza, Burkina, Cairo, Ada, Dahlia, Zulu, Casablanca, and Fulani. As you guys can see, the color selection in these two rows of the palette is really interesting to me. The first shade, which is Giza, is definitely a really nice light color, but there's nothing that's very, very deep or dark to provide any sort of contrast with the rest of the shades. The majority of the colors really kind of lie in that mid-tone spectrum, which there's nothing wrong with that. It just would have been nice to see a little bit more variety. So now let's go ahead and discuss the textures in this palette. In my opinion, there are three very distinct different textures that are included in this palette. The first of which is a very metallic, almost foiled shadow. Now, the more foiled finish shadows is definitely the majority of this palette. Most of these bright colors are in that foiled finish. I would say these two are foiled and this one here is also foiled. So a lot of this palette is very metallic. I personally really like that. I love these really bright foiled shadow colors. They really remind me of the Makeup Geek foiled shadows, but even more so, they kind of remind me of the Kat Von D Metal Crush shadows. Those are so bright and vibrant and pigmented and creamy, and these kind of remind me of those. I would say these are maybe just a little more stiff, maybe not quite as creamy, but they deliver just as much pigmentation. They are so incredibly just delicious. I've used them with my fingers. I've also used them with a brush, and they actually work amazingly both ways. That is something that differentiates this formula from the Makeup Geek foiled shadows, because I feel like the Makeup Geek ones don't work as well with a brush, in my opinion. These work excellent with stiffer brushes. You can also wet these foiled shadows to literally get a metallic foil effect on the skin, but they work amazingly dry as well. You don't have to wet them to get a really strong color payoff. So overall, the metallic shadows, which like I said, is probably about, I don't know, 60–70% of this palette, excellent. Another shadow finish included in this palette is a pure matte. There are 5 matte shadows from what I can see. There are these 3 right here as well as these 2. The matte shadows are nice. They are still pigmented, but in my opinion, they do need to be built up a little. When you put a brush into these pans, especially more of a fluffy brush, they will kick up a little bit of extra powder. They still do build and blend very nicely on the eye. I would be a little weary because they can sort of blend away if you overly blend. I don't really have anything bad to say about the matte formula. I think it works perfectly fine. I do think the foiled shadows still, like, they have my heart. So I feel like the mattes are definitely overlooked, but that doesn't mean that they are bad at all. And then the third formula, which I guess you could kind of classify closer to the matte, would be a matte base with gold micro shimmer specks, and there are 2 shades. It's this one as well as this one up here, and I would say those are the 2 shadows, in my opinion, that work the worst. Those need to be built up quite a bit because of that gold shimmer in it. I feel like the formula is kind of thin. You know, the gold shimmer doesn't really show up, so I feel like for the effort you're putting in, you're not gonna get the end result of what you see in the pan. So those 2 shades, I would say, are the worst performing. Once again, I wouldn't say they're awful. You can absolutely get them to work, but I mean, the foiled shadows are excellent. The mattes are also very decent. Just those 2 with the micro shimmer are just meh. I can skip them. Moving into discussing the actual colors that are included in this palette, I did briefly mention that as we were talking about the swatches, but overall, I really like the color selection. I like how every single shade in this palette, one next to the other, is very different. I don't feel like any shade in here feels replicated within the same palette, if you know what I mean. I would have liked to see a darker shade, maybe a very dark chocolate brown or even a black, just something that could help kind of ground these brighter shades. But even with that being said, I wouldn't necessarily say this palette is a good standalone palette. I always bring in something like my Viseart neutral matte palette when I'm using something like this, just because, once again, I like to have a black, I like to have a lighter matte shade for a highlight, and I like having a matte medium brown transition color, all of which is not really included in this palette. Because of that, I wouldn't necessarily say this is a great travel palette, but to be perfectly honest, I really wouldn't travel with this palette anyways, just because of the size. It is a really large palette with very large pans, and I would be a little bit afraid of these pans breaking if I were to, you know, move it around too much. My overall thoughts on this palette is that I really like it. I think it's a really great palette, especially for right around 30, just over $30. You get 16 very large size shadows. I do think this palette is worth the hype. Just a little bit of housekeeping information before we wrap this review up. I did want to let you guys know about the ingredients. I still do have the box that has the ingredients on the back. The number one thing in these shadows is mica, and the number 2 ingredient is talc. Right after that, we have magnesium stearate and kaolin, and there are a couple of other ingredients. There are no parabens in this formula, which is really nice to see. Juvia's Place claims this product is completely cruelty-free, and it is created and formulated in the United States, but it is made in China. I'm not really sure what formulated in the United States but made in China really means. I'm just gonna assume it's just made in China. We're just gonna go with that. But based on the ingredients and the research I did, I don't think this is a private label formula. I haven't seen any other formula that's similar to this. So overall, I really like it. Quickly, just in case you guys are curious, I do have this palette on my eyes right now. I have a mix of Giza and Dahlia on my eyelid, and then of course I have this bright blue Dahlia on my lower lash line, and then I did incorporate a little bit of a darker brown and some highlighting shades and stuff. That will all be written in the description box below. But yeah, that is pretty much everything. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think of this palette, and if you guys have your hands on it yet, let me know what you guys think of it in the comments down below, and I will talk to you guys in my next video on Thursday. I'll see you then. Bye! Collection of highlighter powders, but this is basically the first taste of a Makeup Geek highlighter. Nikki, these are all Nikki's looks that she created with the palette, and can I just say, Nikki is gorgeous.